So I think all of you know Esben, and he doesn't really need a very long introduction because he's such a familiar face to all of us. I've known Esben as a competitor when he was at TORM. I've known Esben as an industry advocate at SSA, Singapore Shipping Association. I've known Esben as the sort of front to the regulator during his time at the International Chamber of Shipping. And now I get to enjoy Esben's company as and insights as a fellow director of BW Epic Kosan. So Esben, you have had so many different roles and hats. And apart from the formal roles, I think what we really appreciate about you in the industry is that you have gone about this with this mix of gritty determination and push, which is quite necessary on these industry associations, and at the same time, this charm and friendliness in how you conduct yourself. Some people are only gritty and some people are only friendly, and you have a very nice blend of the two. I am really pleased in a moment to be asking you some personal questions, but before that, to present you with this award in recognition of your outstanding contribution to the global shipping industry. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Esben Poulsson. So Esben, having started with this comment about your sort of broad roles through the industry over many years, let me ask a sweeping question to begin with, which is, what are your strongest memories from your shipping career so far?
Well, thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you very much, Nicholas, for this great honor. I honestly, looking at the list of people who have had this reward in the past, I feel quite humble to be on this list of august people. So many, many thanks for that. I think my first memory was really going to sea at the age of 17 on a 9,000 deadweight three-decker from the west coast of Canada to Australia via the Pacific Islands with a crew of 40. And if you think about that in today's context, where a ship many times the size of, say, a VLCC with a crew of 20, it shows you something. That was one great memory, and the other one was I used to be a shipbroker, and my final deal was selling 2 VLCCs from COSCO in China to Eastern Mediterranean, and it was on the front page of Lloyd's List, and I remember being very proud of that.
You've met a lot of characters in shipping over time. You've been involved in many different companies and situations. The fun but inappropriate question would be, who were the best and the worst amongst those you met? But I won't embarrass you by putting you on the spot. And maybe I'll ask the broader question, which is, in what ways do you think the nature of shipping leadership has changed over time, you know, seeing this span that you have?
Yeah, I think although we shouldn't pinpoint individuals, since you are here, Andreas, I think your grandfather, the great Sir Y.K. Power, would be very, very happy to see what has happened to what was Worldwide Shipping, today's BW Group, under your leadership. He was certainly a tremendous character and a huge presence in our industry. And there are still, thankfully, characters around. But I think what's changed is that in the, let's say from about the mid-late 90s, when shipping companies started listing on stock exchanges such as New York, it brought a different type of personality into the industry. And with, be it hedge funds or private equity, family offices and so on, the way that shipping has financed itself has, of course, changed from the old model of bank with a mortgage and just traditional bank financing. But I hope and I believe that the characters of the past and of the present will still be around. I remember seeing an interview with John Fredrickson where he was asked about, so do you read market reports and so on? And he said, yeah, I glance at them, but to me it's this and this. And I think that's, that actually still remains the case today, that sentiment and gut feel is a big part of the decision making. And long may that last, in my view.
And people talk about, just as a follow-on to that, people talk about sort of increasing professionalization, partly in response to increasing regulation, because this kind of instinctual approach to shipping becomes harder when you have all the compliance and regulations and so on. Would you say that there is an element of that also, or that instinct really is at the heart of it?
I think for the decision, the big decision, whether to order or whether to buy, whether to sell, those are still largely instinctive. But there's no doubt that the analysis and the formality of the decision making, particularly with the involvement, as I said before, of private equity and so on, that brings a different financial discipline, for want of a better way of putting it, to the decision making process.
I'm going to ask you in a moment a question about the sort of more challenging or difficult moments in your career, but maybe before I do that, to zoom out a bit on more of a business oriented question, which is your assessment of the maritime institutions we have today. Are they fit for purpose? What do you think works well, and what do you think could be improved?
Well, Andreas, as I argue in my book, which is for sale outside, by the way, even signed, so I hope everybody here will buy one, because the proceeds goes to the Mission of Seafarers, which is my very favorite charity and a very useful charity, in my opinion. Sorry, I've lost my...
Yeah, just in terms of the institutions, are they working?
No, I mean, institution-wise, as I say in my book, I think IMO is really not really fit for purpose in its current format, in the sense that it takes way too long to get agreement on new regulation. And several panelists this morning have referred to the need and the urgency of regulation and the danger of regional regulation coming through, which I fear is very much a fact, because unless the IMO gets its act together and does what it is meant to do, clearly we will have regional regulation, which no one in this room, as was said earlier, wants, because we all want a level playing field. So I think the IMO needs really to be looked at, but of course it's part of institutions generally. I mean, the UN itself has its drawbacks, for sure. As for association works, I think associations, there are too many. As I also argue in my book, there is room for merger to make what I would describe as an IATA of shipping, a one huge organization that, taking account into the differences between segments of our industry, can still speak as a strong voice for our industry. The problem is the ship owners, generally speaking, do not really know what these associations do, and therefore they don't really want to fund them. And like all humans, they want something for nothing. So associations do well with minimal budgets, but they could do so much better. And I think there is really scope and room for consolidation of associations.
And how do you feel about the emerging institutions or associations? Because there's a lot of focus on IMO as the kind of mega institution that can go further because of global regulation. But then you have these new institutions like the decarbonization centers and Global Maritime Forum. Obviously, one's focused on particular segments like Poseidon Principles on banks or insurance and so on. How do you feel about these institutions? Are they better suited because they're smaller and more agile, or is it difficult because they are not bringing the whole world with them?
Well, I go back to, I think you and I were on a panel together at the very first, what was Danish Maritime Forum that's become Global Maritime Forum. And I remember saying at the time, I think it was in 2016, I remember saying the mere fact that something like this can be created would tend to suggest that the existing associations are not doing a very good job. I mean, to be very blunt about it. However, I think subsequently it's shown that an association like ICS is very nitty-gritty and hands-on at IMO virtually daily. The Global Maritime Forum is more of an ideas, a collection of owners with ideas and setting some targets and some goals of what to do. And in fact, ICS, for example, on the seafarer side, we cooperated with the Global Maritime Forum, and I think as long as there is collaboration and not too much duplication amongst these associations, then it's fine. If there is a need for one, it's okay. But I mean, ideally, there should be more collaboration. There should be more consolidation amongst them,
right,
to avoid duplication.
To get a bit more personal, you were chairman of ICS, and you were sort of in the front line on topics with IMO and so on. What were some challenging, difficult moments? Can you tell us some inside stories about what it was like?
Well, I think a high moment was in October 2021 when the industry decided to move from 50% aspiration in 2050 to 100%. I think that was really an amazing thing, and it was a result of really a lot of arm twisting, cajoling. I hope not bullying, but in any event, there was a lot of persuasion that took place, and all of a sudden it came together, and at COP26 in Glasgow, it was sort of announced formally, and it set the scene for, I think, what was a really very, very good conference that very sadly I missed due to COVID, by the way, but nonetheless it was a great moment. A low point was I visited 32 of our members throughout my 6-year term because I felt it was always important to understand what individual member associations, what we could do for them, and I particularly visited the Union of Greek Ship Owners, being our biggest member and most important member. And I had let's say, a difference of opinion with Mr. Theodore Venyamas, who served as president for no less than 12 years. And he was quite, I would almost say, fearsome personality. He was certainly a strong personality. And he and I differed on an issue, which thankfully I can't remember what it actually was. But we had a robust exchange. But that very same evening, I sat next to him at a dinner in honor of the European Ship Owners Association, EXA, and there were no hard feelings.
Good. What about, just to press one step further on this one, people describe regulation setting as a sort of sausage factory. It's a bit messy, and you don't really want to know what goes into it, as long as what comes out is good. But what works when you're in these sessions, debating a particular, take the tax as an example, the carbon levy as an example, or any of the regulations, what works to move things forwards? Because people are sort of saying it's too slow and it's frustrating. What, in your experience on the ground, gets things to a successful conclusion?
Well, I must confess that as chairman, I very rarely actually went to IMO sessions, and the few times I did, I was very happy that other people could undertake this work, because it is, if you are impatient, it's not a good place to be, because everything is a discussion and a little bit of behind the scenes and off the record discussion, and I would say that the various shipping associations, certainly ICS, who has been an observer there since 1960 or 61, the original industry body to do so, are very, very good at finding out where the difficult the difficulties are from various countries' point of view, and they try to sort of form a consensus of key countries that are then influential with other countries, and then slowly but surely it all falls into line. And I mean, this fund that ICS is trying to promote at the moment, it's called the Fund and Reward Scheme, and to me it's a classic example of a common sense industry type initiative, which at first sight everybody thinks that that's a great idea because it makes total sense. But then when you get into the nitty-gritty, some countries are a bit worried about that the quantum will be too high. Some countries think it's too low. And then when you get a major nation like the US being anti, it becomes very, very difficult. And I'm really hoping that this fund and reward scheme will work out and will be agreed at MEPC in June. But honestly, based on past history, I'm not overly optimistic. But I'm optimistic and hopeful. But let's see.
And specifically, what do you think is the right level in terms of dollars per ton, bearing in mind that some people will always think it's too high and others will always think it's too low? What do you think works?
I asked the Secretariat this, and they said we don't have a view on this because it's if we say something, then immediately some countries are going to start objecting and so on. So we don't have a view on it.
But you subscribe to the belief that, if you start low, you can bring it up over time. At least you give people time to adjust, right?
I mean, by starting low, I think our calculations show that by 2030, I think the figure is, I haven't got it here, but yeah, no, but anyway, it can be a reduction of about 16 million tons of CO2 even by 2030 even if you start low, and that of course will give the fund quite a sizable amount of money.
Right.
So it's to me, as I say, this is really a common sense, and apparently the European Union is for it, provided that it's complemented by a global greenhouse gas standard, and that is in itself is a good thing, because if they are for it, that is a big help. The big question, as I say, is the US.
Another kind of more personal or feeling question, and linking it back to the last panel, on where do we go, what does the world look like, or shipping look like in 20 years? You hear these schools of thought, one of which is optimistic and saying on climate change, we can do this, we have pathways, humans do amazing things. And another school of thought, which is like, get real, guys, this is 60,000 ships that you're talking about trying to change to fuels that don't even exist today. Which school of thought are you? What is your feeling on our kind of prospects over the next 10, 20 years?
Well, I mean, as we heard in the previous panel, it's difficult to argue the facts that it was so eloquently put. But I must admit, I'm on the other school, because first of all, as we always say, to be in shipping, you have to be an optimist, and that's been said many a time. But I think my gut feeling is that we should never underestimate the ingenuity of mankind, and I think that what has already happened, even in these 5 years, I think if you look back 5 years, you would not think that we would have got as far as we have. It's true that it's too slow, but the acceleration and the momentum that's underway now is tremendous.
Yeah.
I remember at the last Global Maritime Forum here in Singapore, I remember you specifically saying, this train is leaving the station. Are people on it or not? And I think you persuaded a lot of people, and there is a momentum, as I say, that one should not underestimate. And here in Singapore in particular, there's just so much going on. Global center being one, and so on. So I'm very, very optimistic, even though I fully take the points made that the scope and size of this challenge is absolutely enormous.
Yeah. I mean, just to add a thought on that, my own view is that a lot of human progress in fact, all human progress in the past has been incremental, and it's really a question of timescales, because everything that we're doing today, incredibly large vessels, spaceships and whatever you choose to care to mention, started with very small steps with rowing boats and then sails and then small engines and what have you. So if you give it enough time, actually incremental progress takes you a very, very long way. But then the other observation, which more and more people are talking about these days, is we have this exponential power behind us now, which is artificial intelligence and technological progress. Machines that can learn by themselves and can improve themselves without human intervention. And at one level, of course, this is very scary, and a lot of people are debating, does this go beyond our ability to control it? At another level, actually, if you can say to a machine, figure out for me how we can do ammonia safely, or how we can, improve our supply chains in XYZ, and they can then, on a much more accelerated basis, help us to find solutions. I think that can be quite disruptive. So incremental will get us there, but over a long period, or disruptive through these new technologies that we have. Let me turn to another question and start to sort of wrap up here. But maritime centers. What do you think that maritime centers like Singapore need to be thinking about for future success? And I'm asking this, future success for themselves, for the center, but also for the industry. What sort of things do centers need to be doing?
I think what Singapore has done, everybody can see. I mean, when I started in shipping, which admittedly is 52 years ago, Singapore was a backwater, quite frankly. And today it's rated number one shipping center in the world. But this was based on a strategy that was set out very clearly and built brick by brick over many, many years. It didn't happen overnight, and maritime centers don't happen overnight. I think that the danger now for a place like Singapore is on employment passes. I know this sounds very nitty-gritty, but I really believe that in the early 2000s, when Singapore was very open to this was a big trigger in helping us get where we are, because shipping is global, and whatever talent may or may not be available in Singapore, it should be possible to bring it in. And I think if you look at a place, just take one example, a place like Vancouver, they've tried for years with huge advertising campaigns to bring people on shore. One of the reasons it failed was because, okay, I want to open an office here, I want to bring some people in. No, you can't do that. Copenhagen, which is a major shipping center, could be an international shipping center if, again, they change their policies on non-European nationals working there. But it's kind of a sensitive subject, and it's one where it concerns me a little bit from a Singapore perspective. Is if you look at Dubai, zero tax, no problem with employment passes, and quite a good time zone in terms of European business. We have to be careful from a Singapore perspective of Dubai. I'm looking at you, Kenneth. Nothing, but it's just, it's a point that we've talked about before. But certainly ease of access of people in a global, it's good for people of different nationalities to work in different centers because shipping is so global. So this is, I think, a point that's often overlooked. The rest of it, the tax and the cost of living and all these things, the cost of doing business, these are all the normal considerations.
No, I think it's a really, yeah.
You, by the way, before we wrap up.
Okay. He says he wants to ask me something, but this is a session for me to ask you questions. Anyway, we'll come back to that. But I think it's a good perspective, which is that, centers, countries or centers or whatever, can't rest on their laurels. First of all, one needs to keep doing the things that brought past success, such as being open and welcoming. And then also one needs to be a little bit paranoid and keeping an eye on what the competition is doing and how fast they're running. And right now, one does hear a lot about Dubai and amongst others. So I think it's actually a mentality that has served Singapore so well in the past, which is to be a little bit paranoid is a strong word, but a little bit sort of nervous about the competition and sort of always trying to stay on its toes. So I did have one more for you, but you wanted to ask me a question, Esben.
Yeah, I think we've more than enough about me. I mean, I think and everybody in this room knows Andreas Sohmen-Pao is really an exceptional person and a very admirable and amazing personality, who also wrote the foreword of my book, by the way, so that's another reason to buy it. But Andreas, BW Group is operating in most segments, LNG, LPG, product tankers, really across the board. You were instrumental in the formation of Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization, and you have often expressed views on the decarbonization agenda. So I would just love to hear, and I know that everybody here would love to hear from your perspective, BW Group's taking a sort of a view of your whole group. Where do you see it, and where are you at?
So, not something I was thinking about before this, but I think what really was a tipping point for us as a group, and maybe also for myself, was when we took the perspective that we shouldn't try to do everything centrally and in a very controlled manner. And for many years, in fact, my grandfather started the business on a highly centralized model. He built the largest fleet in the world by the late 1970s, and it was all done with him at the center of things, and with a sort of big team of very loyal and dedicated individuals who would just kind of execute on instructions. And I think that was the right model for the time. Apart from anything else, he was running this, a lot of ships on long bareboat charters, Shikumazen system, and it was about sort of accounting and operations, and it wasn't navigating a wildly changing global landscape. So centralization worked really well. And I think for a long time, even myself, we thought, well, if this has been working for us in the past, we should continue to run a fairly centralized system. And it was after the acquisition of Bergesen in Norway in 2002 that we started to think this is too much to manage centrally. We had a guy who was fixing 20-year LNG charters and chartering product tankers in the spot market at the same time. And these are two totally different, mentalities that you need. And the volume grew and the complexity grew. And then we sort of said, okay, let's start setting up companies which are focused on individual segments. And at first it felt a little bit scary because it was like, well, we're going to need 10 CEOs now and 10 CFOs and 10 whatever, and this is going to be very costly. But what we found is by letting go that they all kind of moved faster, became very focused on their segments. And I guess the summary of what I'm saying, and it's a little bit true also when one is establishing either new companies or new segments, is, concentrate on two things, which is finding the right people, really good people, and setting good values, which is the sort of backdrop to decisions. And the rest kind of let 100 flowers bloom, let 1,000 flowers bloom, if you will, and let people go. I mean, I get so much pleasure from reading in the newspapers about initiatives that are happening, one company developing an AI tools, another one setting up a collaboration with Microsoft, another one is doing ammonia. And it's the first I've heard of it. I mean, I'm reading about it, and that might sound a bit scary, that I don't know what's happening in the organization, but actually these innovations have to bubble up and have space to develop without everything being highly controlled and filtered. So that's my perspective. In an increasingly complex world, let people go and experiment and discover.
Very, very interesting. And on top of that, I just read this morning that along with Maersk, BW Group is the top employer in Singapore. Have you seen this report?
Yes, well, there was recently a Singapore survey, and we came out. Actually, we were 145th, so it's not so amazing. But within shipping and transport, we came out pretty well. I think we were next to UPS and FedEx and Maersk and others. I think employee engagement is so important if you believe in the S in ESG. Actually, you can talk about social elements being diversity and equity and inclusion and so on, but it all comes to this sense of engagement and belonging. If people feel that this is a good place for them, then you're probably doing the right thing. So that's really important for us as a component of ESG. We are very pleased, to see the level of engagement. I mean, we're scoring in the 90s on our surveys. We're frequently getting responses, 95, 98%, engagement scores, belief in the values and so on. But we still have some work to do. And, actually our neighbors, Google is in the same complex, they're number one. So we need to do we have some work to do. So my last question, time's up. Well, let me ask you one quick last question, which is, why do you love sailing so much? He's a great sailor, Esben. What do you love about sailing?
I love to be on that's why I went into shipping. I just love to be on the water. And sailing is really the love of my life. And in fact, I was watching a video last night of the 1979 Fastnet race, wherein 16 people lost their lives. I was in that race on a Hong Kong boat called Vanguard, and it brought back a lot of memories. But so that was not something one would like to repeat. But no, I just love being on the water, and I know you do as well. And our time is up, and thank you so much, Andreas, for everything. And as Chairman Mao would have said to Wang Guofeng, with you in charge, my heart is at ease.
You were very kind. Congratulations, Esben, on the award, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, sitting?